So this morning so far, not one but two opportunities to go to America free of charge. You just got to ignite that spark that's in your head and come up with a great idea. Now, great ideas are cheap. There's tons of great ideas. There's tons of good ideas. It's the really great ideas that you need to get and be involved in and develop forward. Because if you think, and you might think that everything that's ever needs to be invented has been invented, but let's take 15 years as the average age in the room here. Paying compliment to Phil and myself by me, and we were going to drag it up quite a bit. But if you go back 5 years, no Sky Plus, no Sky HD. Go back 10 years, so this is in your lifetime, go back 10 years, yeah, there were flat screen TVs, but there was no HD television. It was big flat TVs in your wall, and you could still buy a TV that was deeper than it was wide. Now, some of you might not remember that. You might remember your dad, your mum having one. But we're just going back 10 years, 2 lots of 5. Go back 15 years, no broadband. You couldn't do what you were doing at home, on the hoof, and annoy your dad by saying, the wireless is not working, Dad, get it fixed. Or Mum. 15 years ago, only in 15 years, those great ideas have been invented, applied, and are now commonplace in our market space. So the two spaces that you're in today and about getting to America with the organizations that Sherry and Chris is going to touch on very shortly, really give you that moonshot idea. Thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about something that really does get big. And if you enjoy scaling up and you enjoy getting involved in something that's much, much bigger, these two competitions are really for you, really exciting places to be. So, in that sort of history and evolution of technology, I'm not a great gamer. I've never been a great gamer, as my kids will tell me as they shoot me in the head playing Call of Duty all the time. But the history of that Robbie Graham from Brightsolid is about to introduce you in the timeline and what he's going to talk through what's coming is really of interest to me because this is my life. This is my history. I've seen all this come out of boxes and unwrap it in cellophane over the last 15, 20, 25 years. Really interesting to hear what's going to come from Robbie Graham from Brightsolid in the next period of time and how you see things evolving. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Robbie Graham from Brightsolid.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I'm going to talk about app development. I'm a gamesy background, but it's kind of general apps I'm going to talk about today. You guys be exiting university around about 2018, so I kind of focus on where we're going to be roughly and about there. This is me, usually when I'm not terrorizing small fish. I'm making games. I started making games on the Commodore 64s back then. That's actually a screenshot I photoshopped onto the screen of one of the first games I worked on. Back in the late 80s. Commodore 64 has something like 10,000, if not even more than 10,000 less RAM than a standard smartphone these days. And it's crazy to think that we would spend ages working on these games. We actually spent 8 developer months on average on games back then. People got together in teams of about 1 to 3 teams. The classic is your programmer in your back bedroom doing everything himself or herself. Usually himself back then. 10 years later, we're talking console started taking over at this point. That's the Wii game I worked on the Super Nintendo. And the teams back then were about 5 to 10 people starting to scale up and about 75 developer months to make a full-on video game at that point. 10 years after that, PlayStation 2 and Xbox came along. And the teams at that point, by that point I'd graduated from being an artist on video games and I was a product manager at that point. And we're talking 480 developer months and up to 30 people and even more than one location. So the teams are getting quite meaty at this point. And coming up to today, apart from the fact that games machines are looking ever more serious and somber, the budgets are now getting crazy. 2,000 developer months plus. Grand Theft Auto, which is famously made in Edinburgh, that'll well exceed that. And the budgets of these games are getting absolutely massive. You've probably heard of Destiny's come out. I haven't played it yet. But its budget was, anyone know what the budget that one was? It was a lot. How much was that? It was tens of millions of dollars anyway. So the developer months, you can see there's a pattern here every 10 years. It's not a linear pattern. It's accelerating, and it's getting kind of crazy. So the answer to this, from my point of view, before I completely lost my mind working on these enormous, huge projects that dragged on for years, was apps. Apps have started to appear recently over the last few years. The great thing about apps is they are very cheap to make, 45 developer months, usually a team of 3 to 10 people. I'm currently working on a team of 3 people. So they're very, very agile, small teams, and you can see the difference there between console games and apps. And that's really refreshing from someone like me who's worked on these bigger and bigger and bigger projects. Suddenly you're working on little apps. You guys, it's great news for you guys. When you come out of uni, you'll have the flexibility to work on tiny little projects really quickly, agile, and get feedback very quickly from them. One of the side effects in working on apps is instead of dreaming and working on games like this, you end up working on a product that looks more like that. And there's, to me, there's nothing to be ashamed of about working on a product like that compared to Grand Theft Auto. That's a much more exciting project for me because just with the budgets are much faster to get through the apps. And one of the big advantages of apps is you can update an app. In Grand Theft Auto, it's very difficult to press another bunch of disks and ship a whole bunch of boxes. With an app, you can kick out an app onto the App Store, which is half finished. It's not really done, but you just want to see how users interact with the product. Sherry talked about Angry Birds version 20, 25, 30 before they got the formula right. And it's really useful to be able to just experiment on user bases. And that's what we're doing these days with apps. So the game that I'm working on just now, we released that and it definitely wasn't finished. We released that on Facebook. I was embarrassed when I released it. I was kind of cringing when users would start to use it. But we weren't really interested if users were having a good time or not. We wanted to know specific things about how they were using the app. We'd learn from that, and then we'd make a slightly better app and release that to a set of new customers. The other big advantage of apps is this one, which is, I think this is a photograph from some sort of papal audience in Rome, but it's separated by 8 years. And you can see the big difference there is mobile phones. Hands up, who's got an actual smartphone, something with a nice big glass screen that you can play games on? How many people have got one? So almost everyone, it's about 80% of you, and I guarantee it, in 5 years' time, if I ask the same question, it would be 100% of the audience. Smartphone penetration, in terms of who's got a smartphone, if you think back at those pictures of the consoles, the people who had the consoles were generally kids, young adults, mostly male. Smartphones are universal, everyone's got them. And a byproduct of that is app sales are going through the roof. In 2017, we're going to have a number with lots of zeros on the end of it, 268 billion downloads, $77 billion generated in app sales, just app sales on mobile phones in that 1 year. So very, very quick tour of app development. A lot of you are probably intending to get into games development or app development, probably programming, maybe a bit of artists. So I just want to go through some of the roles in the modern app industry. I'm a product manager, which is a fancy name of just saying product manager, just a manager, basically. This has evolved over the years. It used to be just shouting at people and showing them the schedule and saying, work harder. And now it's kind of slightly entrepreneurish. Slightly. So part of my job is to get to know technology. So if you can balance these things I'm about to say, then maybe this is a good role for you. Technology is knowing what hardware is out there, what it's capable of in terms of like linking with other bits of technology, who uses the technology, things like that. And in terms of user experience, getting to know certain parts of the sectors that you're going to kick your product towards. So if you're doing a game for, say, old age pensioners or single mums or infants, if you're going to do an app for that audience, really knowing that audience inside out, kind of knowing their pain, knowing what they want to do but can't do properly, that's an actual real skill and very, very useful in app development. And the third part is having an eye for business, knowing where your product might make some money, knowing where the audience is big enough, and knowing where all those three things come together, basically. Currently, I'm working on a product to do with genealogy, family history. I work up in Dundee, and there's the company up there, DC Thompson, who has lots of family history brands. And it's actually quite boring for kids. They don't want to go through dusty old documents like this. People who are retired have the time and the inclination to go through this stuff. So the thought was at DC Thompson, could we do a product that might bring this kind of family history market to the kids, or at least, if not the kids, the parents who are busy looking after the kids. They don't have the time to do all this stuff. So the grandparents have got all this data. How can we give that data to the rest of the family? So these guys are doing all the family history research, but they don't really know what to do with it. They've got reams and reams of this data. These guys are too busy, but they've got quite a lot of money. And these guys don't have any money, but they've got tons of time on their hands. So we've got this kind of, suddenly, if you think back to the product manager diagram, we've got these users we understand now, their needs and their wants, and we've got the technology behind it, and we're thinking maybe there's a business here, so we sit down and start talking to the people. And this is maybe one of the key lessons for app development, is actually not just coming out with an app, I wonder if this would work properly, and doing an app, actually going out, talking to people and finding out what they actually want is a really important part. If you talk to enough people, you'll slowly assemble a bunch of little statements, little user stories. So something I can share my family history with. As a parent, I want something that maybe me and my kids appear in. As a busy parent, I have only 2 minutes to play every single day, and maybe you're getting some little bits of feedback from the people that own the business. Maybe it's yourself, something that has 2 revenue streams in it, for example. And then you go off and sit down with all that information and data, you go and sit down and do a few sums, and the product manager might come back with a potential business plan. And it's not just a question of just putting together Angry Birds or something. You actually, it makes a lot more sense. It's much smarter to actually come up with a little business plan before you start. There's no point doing a game when you find out there's only 5 people in the world that are ever going to play it, or there's never going to be a revenue stream behind it. You're just going to lose lots of money. Once you've got something you think, this could work, we've got an audience, we've got a problem that the audience has, we've got the technology that might solve this product and no one else is doing it, that's when you bring in the designer. So the product designers out there, hopefully there's a few of you, this is another part of the games industry I've kind of worked my way through. From a games point of view, product design is all about injecting fun and simplicity and clarity into some product. And for a generic product designer, if you're going to do an app, say Skyscanner is a good example, or any kind of non-games app, I'd still argue that injecting fun is a really important part. So the slide to unlock thing, for example, is a good example of what I consider is just a digital toy. It's just a very simple thing, and you probably don't think much about it, but if you slide it halfway and let it go, what happens? How does it feel? How does it slide back? It's just very satisfying. It has a little bit of weight. Somebody sat down and thought very, very hard about how that should feel and look and the size of it and the way it looks. So the product designer has to be obsessed about clarity, but also just making it just something with a little joy in it, something that's just slightly good fun to use. The other thing the product designer needs to do is stick to the mission, keep your eye on the ball, and don't lose the plot. So let's say your customer is a 6-year-old girl as your customer base. There's millions of them out there, and they really want some product to use on their birthdays. They want a nice big present on their birthdays, and you sit down, you spend millions of pounds developing. You don't want to over-design the product, because at the end of the day, if you get it wrong, if you don't talk to the customer properly, you find that the customer is just interested in the box that's coming, and you've wasted like millions of dollars of development money. So make sure that you understand what the problem is that the customer has, and don't go and build something that you think the customer wants, but there was no real evidence the customer actually wanted that to begin with. Whole bunch of app-specific things that the games designers want to be working on as well, or the app designers want to be working on. That isn't maybe so obvious to the average app user, which is one of them is keeping the user using the app again and again. So this is one of the more obvious ways of doing that, which is bribing them, basically. If you come back on a 16th and 17th, we'll just keep upping the prize. But if you miss one day, that's it. You start at ground zero again. And people will really engage with the product because of little techniques like this. The other design part we have to think about in apps is revenue streams. People spend money in apps for a whole bunch of different reasons. There's 3 main ones I'm going to show you here. One is to show off. So people generally spend money in life to show off. Fancy cars, that kind of thing. The second reason people spend money is just to make their lives a lot more convenient. So this is an example in real life, the Tesco delivery and apps. For example, if you're playing something like Farmville or Simpsons Tapped Out or something, people will spend money to speed up the game process so they can beat their friends. That's a little bit of showing off, a little bit of convenience, but that will trigger someone to get their wallets out and spend actual money on your product. And the third thing, which arguably is the most important, is people will spend money to be nice to each other and buy gifts to each other and enhance their social standing. It's not entirely about just giving. Sometimes by giving, they get a lot more back through social standing and reciprocation from the people who have just received the gifts. And this last point is worth bearing on, because There's one problem with the apps. It all sounds great, apps. I've showed you lots of big numbers of potential revenue, but there's a huge problem with the apps. In that app stores are quite busy places. Having your app found is a bit of a problem sometimes. So this screen here, hopefully you can see every pixel there. There's 750,000 pixels on that screen, which represents every app that's actually maintained on the App Store at the moment, the Apple App Store. 750,000 apps. If you come up with one app, the problem is getting found on that. Now, there is one dot on that picture, which is bright red, which is unbelievably good marketing, because everyone else is gray. The shades of gray. I don't know if anyone can see the red pixel on that screen. So I'm going to throw £1 million of marketing on it. There it is there. So that little red pixel, that's your app. That's the problem you've got. If you come up with an app, it will get completely buried in other apps. So the power of marketing, the power of especially free marketing, which is word of mouth, is really important in app design. And that flower shop photograph earlier kind of sums it up. Gift giving, getting people to bring in their friends to help them out, all that social networking stuff, the stuff that you see in your Facebook feed that really annoys you when people are telling you about, I just got through level 23 of Candy Crush Saga. That stuff is critical for that industry to survive. Yeah, all that stuff on Facebook that everyone seems to hate, I hate it as well. That's kind of part of the life cycle of those products. Programmers, how many programmers here are going into software design? I'm not a programmer. This is maybe one of the few roles in app design that I don't really have much experience with. Programmers, they do the normal stuff, get the AIs moving, the collision detection, tying in the art and the audio and all that stuff. But the thing I want to maybe stress, if you're thinking about getting to programming, is the stuff to do with bringing in Facebook and then tying in all the social networks, and more than anything, the back-end stuff. So database management, MySQL, Cassandra, making sure your product is properly online. It's a multi-screen experience. You can play it on an iPad, you can pick up the same account, play it on your Android phone, or sit down at a web browser, and it's the same thing. It's all talking to the same server. Something like half our software effort right now is all to do with database management. So it's not just about flashy explosions and cool sound effects. It's actually, there's a lot of back-end stuff going on. And if you get yourself into database engineering, there's a huge demand for that right now. They're absolutely like hen's teeth at the moment. Visuals, graphic artists, that's my background on art. And the one thing I would say about visuals, if you're thinking about getting to that part of the games industry, is keep it nice and flexible. So if you can do that kind of style, maybe you can do a more illustrative style as well. That's always very useful. Maybe you're obsessed with kind of a Tron-like sci-fi look, that's great. But the chances are you're going to be spending a year working on a game like this. You've got to be flexible, and you've got to be happy to take on any style at all. And you cannot be too fussy about, well, I only do Angry Birds style stuff. Animation as well, graphic artists, all very well being a nice graphic artist, but really not much use unless you can animate them. So you've got to understand motion and weight and visual effects. Flash animation in this case is probably the more common way of doing that kind of thing. And then you've got your other slightly more minor roles, but actually quite useful roles for getting into the industry. This is an advert I saw on the web the other day for a games tester. Games testers is a great way. Let's say maybe you skip university, or you come out of university and you just want a way into the games industry. Most of the producers in the games industry I know started off testing games. This guy's hilarious. He's smiling, he's always having an amazing time, and money is literally raining from the sky as he plays the games. And testing isn't like this. It's actually quite tedious. You go through the game one tiny little bit by one tiny little bit. Does that work? Tick. Next. Pick it up. And you've got to do it again and again and again. But it's a very, very important job, and it's a great way into the industry. And then we've got audio guys as well. They tend to work in their own companies on apps. App teams are too small to support a dedicated full-time software engineer. So if you think about the app industry, there's all these little satellite companies. There's sound audio supply companies who maybe spend a month working on one project and they go and work with another project for another month. And that's also a very, very important part of the industry. And then part that I hadn't experienced until very recently, until we started working on apps properly, is that marketing problem you saw earlier. Marketing is a really, really important thing. And the marketers have to deal with press releases, and they also have to do things like video trailers. So do you know how to use, for example, Adobe After Effects or any good video editing software? They have to put nice little trailers together, coordinate press releases, do all the copy for the game. That is the writing for the press releases and all the advertising, and just liaise with all the other social websites. Do you have a Facebook page, a Twitter page? All these things have to be kind of looked after. And usually, all those jobs I've just gone through, there's about 6 or 7 there. Usually 2 or 3 people do all those jobs. So I'm doing the product management, I'm doing the design, I'm doing the marketing, the programmer's doing the testing, he's doing the programming. And the one thing about marketing I would say as well, if you're going to think about an app, is coming up with something that's got a bit of a hook. If you go to The Guardian and say, hey, games blog at The Guardian, I've got this great new game, it's called Flappy Penguin, it's going to be amazing, they're just going to completely ignore you. So you've got to come up with something that's a little bit original and not a rehash of some old project. It's very, very tempting to just like clone something that's just done very well. Chances are you're not going to make any money. In fact, I'd say 9 out of 10 app developers who start with grand designs for an app will not make money because they're not doing it very smart. They're just kind of basically shotgunning the market and hoping something sticks somewhere and something that'll bounce back and make a bit of money. They're not really talking to the market first and doing it in a smart way around. This is just a random example of an app that thought I did it quite smart. They'd obviously seen kind of a bit of a rise of the phenomenon of the selfie over the last couple of years, and they did an app to do with selfies. And it may not be the best app in the world, but people like newspapers and things from a marketing point of view are more likely to sit up and pay attention because it sells copies of papers. It's something that readers might want to look at. So think about that as well. How might your app interest the media? How might they pick that up? Because that's essential. And then the last kind of maybe job in a team you've got is dealing with people like this. If you sell your game to maybe 1,000 people, 1 or 2 of them will be furious about something. So, the game might blow their device up or delete some part of their lives. And it's the customer relations people in a team of 3 people. That's everyone in the team, basically. It's the customer relations people to turn these guys into these guys, the best fans in the world. So, quick recap. There are a lot of apps out there. I'm actually looking, there's lots of seats out there, but there's like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of apps out there. And think about how the market's going to grow. That's only going to get worse. So there's no point in just doing a random app and just kind of hoping. I mean, the Flappy Bird guy did it, right? So why can't I do it? But the chances are 99% of the time that's not going to work for you. So what you want to do is think about where your app's going to sit in the market, who's going to do it, how is it going to be marketed. Get to know the customer, remember what their problem is, try and work out is there a problem out there that can be monetized that actually might pay for development costs and actually make me a little bit of holiday money at the same time. And then because they're tiny teams we're dealing with here, you want every member of that team to be really good at what they do. If you've got one dodgy member of your team and your team's only got 4 people in it, that's it. It's probably game over. That person will sink you. And that's a kind of a two-way thing, actually. So ask yourself, if you're part of a small development team, are you going to like pull your own weight? So it's really important that whatever you choose to do, you really, really try and excel at it and be as flexible as you can as well. So from an art point of view, maybe get into a bit of video editing as well, so you can cover, doing video trailers and things like that. And then word of mouth, think about free marketing. How can I get my app out there without spending thousands of pounds on marketing? Those Candy Crush guys and Angry Birds, they spend millions of dollars every year just putting up little adverts on Facebook and putting adverts on other websites, little video adverts for video games. You don't have millions of dollars, I'm guessing, so you've got to come up with some sort of free advertising. Either that or you just do this. You just continually plonk out slightly cheap knockoff games, and then one of them at one point just might stick, but I don't recommend it. It's probably not going to happen. 10 years after that, so that's 2018 when you guys are coming out of uni, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? Form factors, I would argue, aren't going to change much. Mobile phones have got to the smallest they can possibly get, and they're starting to get bigger again. But the form factor, which is the human hand, the thing that holds the thing, that's not going to change. What is going to change is processing speed, memory, connection speeds, but the form factor is not going to change. So the app development is going to be a big thing for many years to come. So If you're thinking of getting into it, I think that's a good decision. Okay, thank you very much.